So if you've been following along, you recall that one of my rear body mount bolts broke as I was taking it off, and the cage that holds it in separated from the place where it's supposed to be attached. So trying to get focused or aimed at the vise so you can see what I'm doing here. But basically, this square cage fits around this square nut but has some wiggle room, and when it's sitting in there you can take the bolt. Well, that's interesting. That bolt should come up from the bottom. So this was in there. There you go. That's how it should be. So I was in there like that. I had to cut it off because this was just spinning inside the pocket where it's at. And that pocket is extremely hard to reach. But I thought that this might be very, very rusted on there, but it's not as rusted as I thought it was. So instead of doing what I was going to do as my first try, which was to heat it up with a acetylene torch, it would appear that it might be possible to break that loose with just a crescent wrench. And if I can do that, that actually would be, imagine that, it's hooked up, or it's sized exactly for it. I don't know what that's why I wear steel toe shoes all the time. Actually, metatarsal soles or arches. It didn't hit me, but could have. The jaws of the vise were just wiggling, and so it was going back and forth. So anyways, if I can get this off, which it looks like I will, that makes it a little bit easier. I don't have to go the torch route. You notice I'm working it back and forth because it gets rid of some of the rust from in the threads. So I'm going to make sure that that's actually in the frame. It is. So what I will have is a nut that I will clean off with a wire wheel. I'll clean this off with a wire wheel, and then show you what I propose to do with the cage in an attempt to be able to get the thing to hold the nut at least long enough for me to get it tightened when I put it back together. So here's a new bolt. I want to make sure that that goes in there very easily. If it doesn't, then I will run a tap through it. long as this goes in this bolt easy, and when I'm actually installing it, I'm going to put some anti-seize on it. That'll lubricate it some. That will go in very easily. As long as it holds long enough for me to get that bolt somewhat tightened, which it should. We'll be good to go. I'll be able to show you my plan. Okay, that'll go that far. So I'm going to take that over to our wheel, which I'm not going to do on camera. Clean it up a bit, and then I'll be back for the next steps. So here's my plan with this thing. I've put these nuts on here. Those are just spacers. I've got the cage nut inside the cage, and it's just tight enough so that I did it by hand. I didn't use a wrench. I don't want this to move because there's a big hole in the center of the cage. I should have showed you this before I put it together. As you can see, that hole is much bigger than the bolt. So that gives you a little bit of wiggle room for the cage nut to move inside the cage, but not enough so that it won't catch and stop it from turning, so that you can tighten it. It's very critical that this be pretty much centered. And I believe that is. Looking at it from all ends, and it's got to be tight enough to hold it in place. So, make it a little tighter. Looks close enough to the center. That way, if this isn't lined up 100% perfectly, there's room for that nut to move inside the cage so that you can get what will essentially be a bolt going up from the bottom to thread into it. Now is the part that's gonna either work or not. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mix up some epoxy and put it on the ends of these two tabs, because those are the only two that hit the floor. And I'm gonna go inside the car and I'm gonna drop this in from the outside. The bolt and the extra nuts are to give it excess weight, so that once I drop it in there, it can sit overnight, the epoxy can dry, and hopefully when it's dried overnight, I can, actually I'll give it a couple days, but I can put a wrench on this, take that nut out, and the cage will be in there good enough so that, remember this tightened very easily, the cage will be in there good enough so that I can get it threaded in and tightened up enough so that it will hold the body mounts in place. So we're looking through the passenger side of the car, through the window, except it's down. We're going into the back corner of the compartment behind the seats. And right in there is the area, there's a pocket, and the hardest part of this task, I think, was cleaning out that pocket so that it had a clean, dry surface for the epoxy to bond to. So I am going to grab that bolt, mix up some epoxy, and I'll show you that before I go and insert it through the hole. So I'm feeling around in that pocket and cleaning it out. I could feel where the rivets were. Remember, both of these were sticking out a little bit, so there's little indentations back there. And I know that these rivets point front to back on the car rather than side to side. So I'm going to put a bunch of epoxy on both of those tabs. So there's the epoxy on the tabs. If you notice, I didn't put it too close to the center because I don't want to epoxy that bolt into place. All I want to do is epoxy the cage, not the caged nut. So that's where I'm going to go. And I'm going to stuff this down through the hole. Hopefully that will adhere enough so that when I screw the bolt from the bottom side, I've got a little bit of a problem. The body's slightly misaligned. I thought there was enough room for it to go through. And it isn't. I'm going to have to align that body a little bit better and try this again. Unfortunately, the epoxy won't dry in the time it takes to align that. I think that was just misalignment of the bolt on my part because I have this 3/8 inch rod that I was able to stick all the way up from the bottom, and there was no problem with that clearing anything. I think I just had misaligned it, and so I really didn't move the body. But I will slap some more epoxy on that and give it another try. I still believe this is a good plan. If I didn't, I wouldn't be doing it. Give this another go, and this time I put latex gloves on so I don't get the epoxy all over my fingers. There is a possibility that maybe I was confused about whether that went in this way or this way. That's why it didn't go down so good. Okay, now that time it went down. I'm going to leave that like that until that epoxy sets, and then I'll come and remove the bolt. So that will be Probably 2 days. It says 24 hours, but generally speaking, if I work on this tomorrow, I'll probably be out of the shop before 24 hours is up. And it's not fully cured for 24 hours, so. Today's Thursday, tomorrow's Friday. I won't do any work really for Labor Day weekend. And by the time I get back here, it will be pretty well set. It will be completely set. So, while that's in place, and I'm waiting on wires and relays and fuses and wiring connectors, etc., there is one more screw that had broken off on the rocker panel on the driver's side as I was trying to remove it. So I'm going to drill that out. So it's been several days since I put the epoxy on the body mount. And now I can go in and remove that bolt. It's set up for sure. So as long as that holds, I'll be good. If it doesn't hold, I will need to get I need a wrench to take that off. Oh no, I got it. Put it in there hand tight on purpose so that I'd be able to take it out like this. So what I'm doing now is leaving the caged nut in there. And as long as it holds long enough for me to get that tightened, that's all I'm asking of that repair. And obviously, because this is wobbling around, the cage is glued down, but the nut is not. So this should be the end of the video on repairing the cage nut for the body mount. Thanks for watching.